Fighting games were a huge commodity during the 90s era, being made popular mainly with the arcade scene, but many of these games would later be ported to the popular consoles of that generation, mainly with the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. There literally is an abundance of these titles available on both of these systems that it's just absolutely crazy, to be honest. But at the same time, these ports would also give access to these games for players in their own home that couldn't always access the arcade version. But with that being said, there were differences regarding different home ports on these consoles, with some clearly being seen as better than others. The PlayStation would often receive many of these ports, but the Sega Saturn would often be seen as the superior competitor with regards to 2D visuals and arcade perfect ports, as it just had some additional features on the console that suited 2D style games, and fighters took full advantage of it. But that's not to say that the PlayStation versions were bad. If anything, they were really good. They just weren't up to scratch for what was an offer to a certain degree, as the PlayStation focused more on 3D and visual aesthetics of that sort. But regardless, they're still worth a try, and if you're a fan of any of these games, regardless of which system you played them on, they were worthwhile to have in your collection. And one of the games we'll be looking at here is Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, that was released in 1998 for the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation in 1999, and it would be Capcom's second crossover fighting game, with the first being X-Men vs Street Fighter, with the gameplay, aesthetics and control systems utilising a very similar aspect from the previous game, but would include more characters from both the Street Fighter and the Marvel universe, with an additional set of modes that you could play as, from battles, versus, training, and even with their own individual story modes. And in this edition, alongside of playing some of the X-Men characters with the likes of Wolverine, Cyclops and the like, you also had access to play as the likes of Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, Captain America, among a few other characters. And the same can be said with a lot of other Street Fighter characters, where there was some additional elements added in, plus there was additional characters that you could unlock the further into the game that you progressed. When you look at the terms of reviews, the PlayStation, right, in fairness, did receive average reviews, as it was heavily compared to the Saturn version, which is fair to say was the more successful of the two ports, as the Saturn had additional features with the extra RAM carts that you could add that would allow for the game to run a lot more smoothly, plus the visuals on these games on the Saturn just looked that wee bit better, as the PlayStation could sometimes often struggle with some of these visual elements. But in saying that, it was quite impressive to still see them running on the console for what they were able to do. So with the modes that are available, you'll have to go through a series of fights where you can pick between a team of characters from your choosing, and if you're playing through any of the main modes, especially if you're fighting as the Marvel characters, you will end up fighting against the final boss under Cyber Akuma, which as we all know is a popular character from the Street Fighter series, if not one of the best ones. But that's not to say that this game is easy. If you're a fan of any of the Street Fighter games, even dating back, like even from the early versions of the arcades, even from playing the game on the likes of the Sega Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, over the years, you'll know how tough these games are, and this here's no different. In fairness now, you can turn up the speed, so you have different selections between like medium, like turbo, or even slower speeds to cater to your liking. But I will admit, even playing the game on even the easiest difficulties, now I'll be honest, I was never the best at Street Fighter games, even though I always enjoyed them. As for me, compared to other fighting games, it really just came down to luck rather than skill in order to win fights, and I found that to be the case here, because I did have a few of the Marvel vs Capcom games over the years on the PlayStation and on other systems, even with the likes of the PS3 and so forth, and I often found that to be the case where, yeah, they were great games, but if you weren't skilled at them, it literally would be down to just button bashing in the hopes that you would win a fight. Now, with a bit of experience, yeah, you do improve, but seasoned fighters will definitely get the most out of this, but casual fighters, probably not so much. You will get a whooping, let's just put it that way. And I found that literally from the first fight. I put the game even on the beginner difficulty, thinking to myself, right, at least I can get myself in on the entry level. I got absolutely destroyed. I didn't even know what was going on. I literally just had to bash buttons like crazy in the hopes that I could even get a few slaps in to make any difference, but to no avail. But as with anything, as some of the fights went on, some characters had different movesets that catered to your play style, and you could take advantage of it. But again, later on, once you get further into the game, you face off against other characters that make things equally as difficult, and you just get whooped all over again. So literally you have to start from scratch. Now, in saying that, I still did get to the final boss, but I got destroyed. So that'll tell you really my skill level at it. But the fact is, I can even get to the boss is even a privilege in itself, and it will take some patience in order to get through this game, especially if you want to try and unlock everything. But like I said, more seasoned fighters of the Street Fighter series or games like this won't have a problem with that, but for players like myself that would play these games more casually, definitely it's going to be a chore.
Ready, fight!
But that's not to say that it's a bad game. If anything, it's an enjoyable experience. Right, it's definitely not as good as the Sega Saturn version with regards to the visuals and the overall gameplay and how the game runs. The Saturn definitely gets top marks for that effort at least. But the PlayStation still does a good job. And in truth, when we look back, not everybody had access to all of these consoles. Not like we have today where literally if you have money you can go out and buy whatever the hell you want. Back then we just had slim pickings. You either had one or the other. In some cases you only wanted one but you didn't want the other, or whatever was available to you. So if you did have access to it, that was the system you played these games on. And whichever one you did have, you can always be guaranteed the players had a good experience, regardless of their flaws or their quirks. It is what it is. Yes, there is definitive versions, but everybody's opinion will be different as to which is their favourite, because it all boils down to which system they would have played the game the most on. And that really just boils down to you as the player at the end of the day. It's a fun game, challenging. It's a typical Street Fighter game where it will just beat the hell out of you if you're not used to it, but you will find yourself coming back for more. That's what makes these games so addictive and what makes them timeless, that they're still as good to play as ever, which they are, in fairness to them, they are. But aside from that, I would love to hear your thoughts on Marvel Super Heroes vs Street Fighter, and what did you think of this unique experience? Which version of the game did you prefer? Did you have it on the PlayStation? Did you have it on the Sega Saturn? Which was your favourite? Or did you prefer playing it in the arcade? I would love to hear your stories of this, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more videos around more of these interesting arcade ports and other types of fighting games that were also released on the PlayStation, I have a playlist here on screen that you should check out that will cover more of these games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.